Okay, teachers and students, we have a few more classes logging on. So give us just a minute and we will get started. Hello, boys and girls. Hello, students. We're going to get started in just a minute. We have a few more classes joining us. In the meantime, my name is Scott Mitchell and I'm from the Silver River Museum. And today we're looking at one of the museum mystery objects that have to do with Florida history. So let's let these other classes join in. They're logging in right now, and as soon as they do, we'll get started as one big group. I hope everyone is doing well today. All right, let me look here. All right, I think we have everyone. Can everyone see me and hear me? If you could see me and hear me, wave. All right, very good. I see waves. Cool. Okay, so like I said earlier, my name is Mr. Mitchell. I work here at the Silver River Museum, and I'm actually in the back room of the museum today for one of our museum mystery episodes. And so here you can see some of the other exhibits. The museum is open every weekend if you want to come out and visit with your family. That's one way to see the museum. The other way is sometimes we do see field trips, but today we're talking about a museum mystery object that has to do with Florida and African-American history. Our third quarter, teachers, is for the museum mystery objects, is African-American history. Our fourth quarter, at the end of the school year, will be military history. But today, we are talking about this object right here. If you had a chance to print your worksheet, that's great. If not, that's okay. This is just a place for students to take a little note or make a sketch if they want. But this is our object today. It is made out of metal and it's a little bit bigger than an egg. It's shiny, flat. There's actually one in the case behind me. I'm going to see if we can get a better picture of it. You see that shiny thing right in the middle? Let's see, right there. That's one of these objects. So I have a PowerPoint presentation with some better pictures, but it's a hard, flat brass object. And if any of the students know what it might be, you could send me, teachers, you can send me some guesses in the chat. But let me start this PowerPoint and I will show you a picture of it that's a little bit better. I think I will. I got all kinds of stuff open here. Here we go. Okay, so here is a picture of, I see some answers coming in already. One guess is a badge. That's a pretty good guess, but it's not a badge. Here's my drawing that's on the worksheet. Here's a photograph of one of the original ones, and you can see it's made out of shiny brass. That's a kind of metal. It's kind of flat. I see a coin. No, it's not a coin. I see a gold stone. No, it's gold colored, but it's not a stone. A treasure. Well, it's kind of an interesting treasure, but let's see. Miss Womack's class says a belt buckle. That is right. You guys got it. It is a belt buckle, but it's a very special belt buckle. It's a soldier's belt buckle. Okay.
Whoa, so you better write it down.
Look closely, you see two letters. This says, this is a U and this is an S. And it stands for, and guess what it stands for? United States. That's right, it stands for United States. So this is a soldier's belt buckle that was in the United States Army, but it's a special belt buckle. We had a terrible war 100 years ago, over 100 years ago in the 1860s called the Civil War. You might have heard of the Civil War. But during the Civil War, the country, our country, fought with itself. The states down in the South, like where we live in Florida, had slavery, which was an awful thing where they would basically take people, they'd kidnap people and they'd make them work and they wouldn't pay them. And it was a horrible thing. The South had slavery. The southern states had slavery. The northern states, like Ohio and New York and up north,
We are not going to talk.
they had used to have slaves, but they had outlawed it. They had gotten rid of that. They realized it was wrong. So the northern states and the southern states were arguing about whether slavery should be allowed anymore. And they could not work it out. they could not come to a good agreement, and they ended up having a war where they attacked each other. And it was called the US Civil War. Remember, this happened a long time ago, 1860s. So if you look closely in this painting, these are soldiers, and look at their belt buckles. It's the same little brass belt buckle that says US. These are US soldiers. And here's a drummer boy, a kid. The drummer boys would go right along with the grown-up soldiers. And here's a photograph of a drummer boy. He's probably in maybe 4th or 5th grade. Well, he wasn't in school. He was actually in the Army. Here's a soldier wearing his belt buckle again. So these soldiers were fighting for the northern states. They were trying to end slavery. And if you notice, these men, these soldiers are African Americans. Now, this is important to our state history, but also our country's history, because the Civil War was so important. It changed the way our country was. We changed from having slavery, which is an awful thing, to not having slavery at the end of the war. And it was a terrible war. It was no good for anybody, but it was something that our country went through. But look at these photographs. You see the belt buckles these guys are wearing. That's what that belt buckle behind me has to do with Florida history. Now, the president then was named Abraham Lincoln. You might have heard of him. Abraham Lincoln actually made a speech, and he said, if we win the war, all of the slaves in the South will be free. And so guess what happened? Lots of slaves moved up to join the army and actually helped fight in the Civil War. In fact, at the end of the Civil War, there were about 200,000 African-American men. Some of them had been free before the war. Some of them were slaves that had escaped and joined the army to fight to end slavery. About 200,000 of them were in the Army and the Navy. So they actually helped the North to win the war.
Yep.
Again, it was a big deal for our country because it really decided how our country was going to behave. Were we going to be a country that had people in slavery, or were we going to be a country where everyone had a chance to be free? So luckily, the North won and slavery was ended. Now, if you think about this, these were battles long ago. These weren't battles like today where they have jet airplanes and trucks and things. These were battles where men used horses and muskets, and they would meet each other in a big field, and they would have a battle to see who won, and the losing side would usually leave. There were several big battles in Florida, but the biggest one was a few hours north of Ocala, up near Lake City. So it was called Olustee, and there were lots of these African-American federal troops at Olustee, and they really helped to save the Union forces from really getting beaten badly. And it was the largest battle in Florida. And here you can see some of the men in the smoke from the cannons, and here's the other side over here, and they're basically shooting at each other, which is not a good thing, but that's how wars go. Okay, the other thing that happened was in Marion County, the only time we had Civil War soldiers here in Marion County was at the end of the Civil War. We had some of these Union soldiers came down and they attacked several farms, and they made all of the slaves free. So the only time we had Union soldiers in Marion County, they were African-American Union troops that had come in to free slaves, and they even burned one farm, one plantation down. So that's the story of the belt buckle. I will show it to you one more time, but it is a symbol of a very important period of history in our country. There it is right there. It's a brass soldier's belt buckle from the Civil War. This is actually a case on African-American history in Marion County, and that's part of it. So I will try to answer any questions if you guys have questions about the Civil War. It's a fascinating time in our country's history. And like I said, it was probably a pretty bad time. People were not being very nice. They're having wars, and those are never good. But the end was a good thing where they got it straightened out and slavery was ended in the United States. It also kept the country from splitting into two smaller countries, which would not have been good because, we would have been two smaller countries. So does anyone have any teachers? I mean, any questions? I'm sorry. Teachers, if you have questions, you can send them to me by chat. All right, Isabella wants to know where you got the belt buckle. Well, we have a lot of really interesting old things here at the Silver River Museum. And sometimes people will actually give us antiques that have been in their family and they're real, and they will decide that they want them to be in a museum so that people can see them. So the belt buckle was actually donated, and that's where we got the belt buckle. How heavy is the belt buckle? Well, it weighs about as much as maybe a small orange. Think of it that way, or like a little apple, because it's made out of brass, which is metal. Did girls wear it too? Now, there were some girls in the Army back in the 1800s, and I'm not sure if they wore belt buckles. They had different types of uniforms. So I don't think that they were wearing belt buckles. Their uniforms were a little bit different. But there are lots of women in the Army now, and they do wear the same belt buckle that the men wear. Things have changed a little bit, the style of clothing. All right, where did the people get kidnapped from, asked Paisley. Well, I think all of the slaves that were kidnapped and brought to the southern states to be made slaves were brought from Africa, from the west coast of Africa. And so there were, I don't know how many countries, but there's a big section of the west coast of Africa that's across the sea. So they would kidnap these people and put them on ships and bring them to our country, and other countries too. Other countries had slavery as well, but they would sell them like property. And like I said before, it was a horrible thing, but it is part of our history. The other thing that would happen is sometimes slaves would have families, so the children were automatically slaves if their parents were slaves. So you might be a slave by getting kidnapped, or you might be just born as a slave. So let's see. Lucas wants to know how long or big the belt buckle is. Well, the belt buckle is about this big. Think of two eggs put together. It's about the size of two eggs, and it's oval shaped, and it's flat because it's like a belt buckle. Okay. How old is the belt buckle? Well, 1860s, 1960s, about 180 years old, so pretty old. Okay, let's see. Lucas and Layla want to know how long or big the belt buckle is. Well, we just talked about that. It's about that big, like the size of two eggs. Why did they have drummers in the Army? Wow, these are great questions, guys. They had drummers in the Army for a very important reason. And remember, kids were drummer boys. They didn't have radios and loudspeakers and telephones and cell phones and all the things we have today. They had to shout, hey, go right or go left or hurry up or slow down. And the drummer boys would beat a certain pattern on the drum, which told the soldiers, go right, go left, hurry up, slow down. So the drummer boys were like messengers. So whoever was in charge of a big group of soldiers would say, okay, beat the drum beat that tells everyone to go faster. So the drummer boy would beat a certain way on the drum, and it would make all the soldiers would hear it, and they knew that it meant to go faster. So it was a way of signaling the soldiers. They were very important. Okay. Where did the Civil War take place? And did they have cannons in the war? Oh boy. Yes. The Civil War took place across our country, but it was mostly in the southern part of our country. So you would have to look at a map, but it was mostly fought in the South, say from around Virginia down in through the Carolinas and Georgia and Mississippi. There were some battles further up north, and there were some battles out west, but most of the fighting took place in the southern states. They absolutely did have cannons in the Civil War, and cannons are like really big guns. And so they would shoot these things at each other, trying to win the battle. So those are great questions. I really like these questions. All right, do we have any other questions? And have you all heard of the Civil War before? Have you heard of Abraham Lincoln? He was the president during the Civil War. It was a very important time in our country's history. And some people still argue about it today, which I think is silly. It's just history. And you can actually read the history books and you could read the letters that the people who were alive at that time wrote. We know exactly what they were thinking. It's all right there. They call those primary sources, right? So we have a pretty good idea of what they were fighting about. And we also have photographs because they had cameras back then. All right, let's see. We have more questions coming in. Oh, did the drummer boys also die? I think sometimes drummer boys would probably get hurt because there was lots of bad behavior going on, people shooting at each other. So probably yes, even though that's very sad. Did the soldiers use horses in the battle in Florida? Yes. Lots of battles used horses. They would have soldiers who rode horses. They were called cavalry, and because horses are fast, right? And then they also had horses that would pull cannons and wagons and things like that. Not all of the soldiers were on horseback, though. Most of them were not on horseback. How long did the war last? It lasted 5 years, which is a really long time when people are behaving that way. How many people lived through the war? Oh boy, I don't know the answer to that question. That would take a little research. We would have to figure out how many people lived in the United States when the war was happening. So the entire country at that time lived through the war, unless you were a soldier and you got killed. But I don't know how many people were actually living in the country during the 1860s. That's a good question. Okay, any other questions? Any other questions? These are really great. So I'll be back in a couple weeks with another museum mystery item or object, and I might even have a guest speaker to talk about African American history in Florida and in Marion County. So I really appreciate you guys joining me, and I hope everyone is having a good day and you have a good rest of the week. Are there any other questions, teachers? Any other questions? You can come out and see the museum on weekends if you want to. Oh, I see some information. Somebody looked this up. Very good. Thank you. So the question was, how many people lived through the war? So one of the teachers looked this up. The population of the Union was 18.5 million. In the Confederacy, the population was 5.5 million. So we're looking at 19, about 24 million people, free people, and about 2.5 million. Wait a minute. Okay, 18.5 million in the north, 5.5 million in the south, 3.5 million slaves, and then there were other areas, the border states and out west. So it looks like probably about 25 million people in the country during the Civil War. So that would be the answer to that question. All right, how much would the belt buckle cost the soldier? The soldiers were given their uniforms and their belt buckles, their coat, their boots, all of that stuff they would give you when you joined the Army or when you were told to join the Army. You got all that stuff, and I think it was free for the soldiers. They would get a rifle and a backpack and a blanket. And so the soldiers didn't have to buy their own belt buckles. How many people died in the Civil War? I'm not sure about that one either. Whoever looked up the other information might be able to look that one up and tell us. How did we get the belt buckle? It was donated by a family. So that's a nice thing. I know that there were quite a few people that died in the Civil War. It was very bad time for our country. Wars are never good. So anyway, does this help you guys with information about the Civil War? Let me go back to the PowerPoint. I have a map that I don't think I got to show you. Let me go back. This one, okay. The red states are the southern states that had slavery, and you can see we're in Florida, so Florida was part of the Confederacy. That's what that was called. The dark blue states were the Union states, and you see there were even a few states out west that had joined the Union. The light blue states, those are called border states. They weren't quite sure which way to go, and they were kind of neutral. They didn't really pick a side right away. And then these light gray areas, these are called the territories. These weren't quite states yet. They were going to become states later. So this gives you an idea. Basically, this is the North and this is the South. And these were the two sides that were fighting. Okay. All right. Let's see if we have, did all the US soldiers wear this belt buckle? Yes, I believe so. Most of the photographs I see with Civil War soldiers, if they're in the Union Army, they're wearing that US brass belt buckle. Now, the Confederate states, the states down in the South that had the slavery, their belt buckles had the letters CSA, and they looked very similar. They almost looked exactly alike, but they had different letters. CSA on the Southern or Confederate belt buckles, and that stood for Confederate States of America. They were trying to form their own country. They wanted to break away and form their own country. So if they would have been successful with that, there would have been the United States and then the Confederate States, and would have been two separate countries. And we're happy that that didn't happen. Okay, any other questions? Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you all so much. I hope that you have a good rest of the day. Teachers, on our website, there's a pretty interesting and fun virtual tour of the museum where you can actually explore the museum exhibits, you know, using 360 virtual photos and film. And so that's a neat thing. It's on silverrivermuseum.com. And then, of course, the museum is open every Saturday and Sunday for the public to come and join. So people can come and visit with their families. And we're also having a big student day, February 18th. If anyone is interested, you can email me, Scott Mitchell, here at the museum. We're doing a special student field trip day on February 18th. It's a Friday, and it's all about prehistoric Indians and Native Americans and archaeology. And there's a lot of hands-on activity, pottery making and archery and all kinds of fun things to do. So that's an idea for a field trip if you want to try to organize a group from your school. And it's really well suited for 1st through 5th grade. So anyway, thank you all so much. I see some thank yous back at me, and you are welcome. I always love seeing you guys. I wish I could see you in person, but this is the next best thing. So we really appreciate you joining us, and I'll see you next time with another museum mystery object. All right, bye everybody. Bye.